Once a brilliant astrophysicist, Sigma has been transformed into a living weapon and is one of the darkest characters to ever be added to Overwatch. So let's take a look at his lore and story before also providing you with some advice on getting started with this gravity warping madman.
Gravity is a harness. I have harnessed the harness. It's in.
As I mentioned, Sigma was once a genius astrophysicist. His research focused on devising a way to harness the power of gravity, and he conducted most of his work from a lab in the Netherlands. But eventually, he had to test his most important experiment to date, and that required a trip to the International Space Station. Unfortunately, something went terribly wrong during the testing, and for a brief moment, he produced a black hole. His exposure was limited, but it was enough that he suffered severe psychological damage and physical changes. Gravity around him began to fluctuate, peaking and dropping in time with his reactions, and this posed incredible danger to the safety of the space station. He was swiftly evacuated, and as soon as he was back on Earth, Sigma was quarantined in a secret government facility. The black hole had broken the man's mind, and he raved uncontrollably about the patterns of the universe, and he had no control over the gravitic anomalies that he was causing. He was deemed to be a danger to himself and others, and was detained in secret for years, where he was given the name Subject Sigma. Over the years, Sigma retreated into his own mind, becoming more and more isolated. That was until Talon discovered his existence. They infiltrated the facility and broke him out, planning on using his brilliance and research to further their own schemes. They manipulated him and turned the once eccentric scientist into a living weapon. Over time, Sigma found that he could move gravity according to his will. Finally, he was able to harness gravity, and he was closer than ever to achieving his life's goal. However, the cost of this breakthrough was great, and his mind remained fractured into different pieces, which he struggles to hold together. Talon's long-term plans for Sigma and his research remain unknown, but the ability to warp gravity, being in the hands of the world's most notorious terrorist faction, is unlikely to have a happy ending. Sigma is a fairly isolated character in the lore, with seemingly no long-term history with any other characters outside of his recruitment into Talon, which will no doubt be expanded upon in the future. However, perhaps he has some small connections. For example, his research on gravity could have been involved in the creation of Zarya's particle cannon's graviton surge. As a scientist, there is also the possibility of him having connections with Oasis, or the other scientist characters like Moira or Winston. Perhaps even a link with Liu Cheng Interstellar. As far as we know, they don't run the International Space Station, but they do have a space station of their own, which had an emergency failure a while back. His connection with Talon is also reminiscent of Widowmaker's story, but where they broke her mind and brainwashed her, Sigma came already broken and a prime target for manipulation. Perhaps that also relates to the melody he can hear in his mind. Perhaps that is the trigger that Talon uses to control him.
What is that melody?
Interestingly, his lore video contains a number of details that suggest there is some sort of split personality disorder, where different parts of his mind are being locked away and want to get out.
Why am I being imprisoned? Release me!
A number of hidden messages are also lurking in the video and can be heard when listening to it in reverse.
Gravity is a harness.
Perhaps these are just the ramblings of a madman, but if Sigma has been brainwashed, that makes two of Talon's most powerful agents who have been forced into servitude.
At the moment of the kill, they are never more alive.
Lastly, Sigma is also the name of a clothing shop in Numbani, but I doubt that has any connection as fashion does not seem to be his strong suit. Enough lore for now, let's take a look at getting started with this new hero. His most important ability is the experimental barrier, which functions just like Reinhardt's or Orissa's, however the way he deploys it is completely unique. The barrier floats forward in the direction of your choosing and can be stopped at will. So while you can use it like a standard barrier to place on the ground in front of your team, you can also do some interesting tricks with it, such as pushing it behind the enemy team to cut an Ana off from being able to heal her allies from long range, or you could throw it into the air to block a Pharah's ultimate. It's fairly quick to redeploy if you need to change direction to block a particular attack, but keep in mind you need to bring the barrier down to let it recharge its health. Lastly, most of the barrier will actually pass through walls and objects. The only part that physically interacts with the map is the centre, where your reticle was when you projected it. His primary fire is hyperspheres. Sigma launches 2 of them at once, and they travel a short distance before exploding and dealing damage to any nearby enemies. They can also bounce an unlimited number of times during that travel distance, meaning you can throw them around corners, off roofs, under shields and payloads, but be aware that their explosion can deal some damage to you. One of the most interesting elements of the hyperspheres is that they cause a small gravitational pull when they explode. It's not overwhelming, but it can be enough to make it harder for hit scan heroes like McCree to land precise shots. His next ability is Kinetic Grasp. This captures any incoming projectiles that would hit the front of Sigma and turns them into shields. This works in a similar way to D.Va's defense matrix or Genji's deflect, and uses a lot of the same rules for what it can and cannot block. In particular, this is a clutch ability when countering ultimates, as not only will it absorb the damage, but it will also massively increase Sigma's shield health, allowing for a more aggressive counter-attack. His next skill is Accretion. With this, Sigma gathers a mass of debris and throws it at a single target. It has a long arc, but unlike his hyperspheres, the debris has a much longer range. It will briefly knock back and down those hit by it, which can be used to throw people off ledges or interrupt abilities. It's also worth noting that it will knock characters like Bastion or Wrecking Ball out of their Sentry and Roll modes. Finally, his ultimate is Gravitic Flux. When activated, it allows Sigma to first take flight and then unleash a targeted area of effect ability that launches any enemies caught inside up into the air before slamming them back down. As of his release patch, it deals good damage, with the slam part of the attack actually hitting for roughly half of a character's max health. However, the true power of this ability is that while the enemies are floating in the air, your teammates are able to shred through them. For example, if an Orisa Bastion bunker composition is causing you trouble, you can pull that Bastion right out from behind cover and leave him vulnerable to focus fire from your team. When characters are caught in the ultimate, they are treated in the same way as if they were caught in Zarya's Graviton Surge, so D.Va and Winston, for example, can't use their boosters or jump to escape, but Orisa's Fortify or Moira's Fade will let them get away. Another thing worth noting is that although flying around like Magneto is cool, it's not always the best idea, as it will also leave you vulnerable to attacks from the enemy team. Provided that you can line the ultimate up correctly, it's generally better not to get too high up. If you do get caught with any form of stun while aiming the ultimate, it will cancel, but once you activate it, they will always slam back down, even if you get taken out. If you're looking to counter Sigma, you want to try to minimise the effectiveness of the barrier, either by just focusing fire to destroy it, or applying pressure from different angles, where he lacks the ability of Reinhardt to reposition instantly, or the curved shape of Orisa's shield that provides protection from the sides. Try to avoid grouping up in any close range fights, as the hyperspheres will be more effective. In particular, corridors and small choke points can really feed Sigma with a lot of damage. His ultimate is powerful, but he can be hit with stuns or knockdowns to counter it. Things like Baptiste's Immortality Field, Mei's Cryo Freeze, or Reaper's Wraith Form will also block the incoming damage. Overall, he is a great hero, with some unique design, but the huge shifts in the meta with the arrival of 2-2-2 role queuing and many hero balance changes mean it will no doubt take some time for him to settle in, and for us to really see just how strong he is. What do you think of Sigma? Do you have any lore theories or headcanon that you want to share? Any tips on using his abilities? Let me know in the comments below. As always, I've been James for Fandom. Thank you for watching, and enjoy the game.
Freedom. Imprisonment. It's all an illusion.